I'd like to talk now about the topic of what is the minimum caliber for elephant. I'd like to start off with the fact that what is the minimum caliber is the wrong question to ask. The right question to ask is what bullets at what velocities reliably have enough penetration for the frontal brain shot. The reason why this should be the standard to meet is because of safety. Some people have demonstrated that you can kill elephants with .22 rifles and lions with birdshot. The reason why no one in their right mind would do such a thing today is quite obvious. It's incredibly dangerous. If an elephant charges you, you may only get one chance to shoot the brain before it crushes you. This is why you want a bullet that can penetrate the brain 100% of the time. Penetration is the most important consideration for elephant hunting rounds, as it allows you more room for error if you are forced to make a brain shot at a poor angle. The smallest bullet that I know can kill an elephant with a frontal shot is the .256 Mannlicher or 6.5 by 53R. However, this may not be the true minimum caliber, because other smaller rounds may be capable of the reliable deep penetration that is needed. Obviously, most places require you to use the .375 H&H or larger for hunting dangerous game, although some regions of certain countries don't have a minimum caliber requirement. Even if the region doesn't have a minimum caliber requirement, most guides will insist you use a large caliber because they still believe the conventional wisdom, and they also know that they will have to deal with any consequences if anything goes wrong on a hunt. In the situation where the standard minimum caliber may not apply, like elephant culling or in the defense of human life, you are generally less limited and will likely be able to decide for yourself what is the best tool for the job. The topic of minimum caliber for elephant is important, but when it is brought up, people usually come to the same conclusion based on circular logic. Conventional wisdom has caused certain caliber requirements to be set into law, usually .375 H&H or larger, and then those requirements are then used to justify the conventional wisdom. Take Craig Boddington, for example. He says that 9.3 caliber rounds are very minimal for elephant. However, he doesn't give a reason why he thinks this in the video or in his book Safari Rifles. Normally, when a guide or hunter believes that a cartridge are lacking, they are quick to point out an experience where they saw a bullet fail to kill. Mr. Boddington doesn't do this, so we don't have any evidence to back up his opinion. Neither does he criticize the .375 H&H for inadequate penetration. Quite the opposite, actually. All of these things point to the conclusion that his beliefs about the .375 H&H are likely based on more of conventional wisdom than his personal experience. Countless elephants have been killed with .375 H&H, so I don't have to show dozens of examples just to prove that it's more than adequate for that. In fact, the 9.3 and .375 have both been successfully used for brain shots on even larger animals. The common minke whale, which weighs from roughly 5 to 10 tons. With round-nosed full metal jacket bullets, 9.3, .375 H&H, and .458 Win Mag are all capable of penetrating into the brain of common minke whales. There was even a case in 2000 where a 10-meter whale was killed with heart shots with .303 and .308 rifles. I should also explain that the penetration needed for the frontal brain shot is dependent on the size of the elephant and how close you are, and the position of its head. The closer you are to the elephant, the more it will lift its head up to see you properly. This means that when you have a very large elephant that is very close, you have to shoot through significantly more of the skull to get to the brain. This could mean that the bullet may have to travel 6 or 7 feet before it reaches the brain. This is not 6 or 7 feet of solid bone, by the way. Elephant skulls are very different from human skulls, for example. Their skulls are a honeycomb-like structure of bone, with red fluid inside that honeycomb. Dr. Kevin Robertson, author of The Perfect Shot, explained that having a high sectional density is important for deep penetration. To illustrate this point, Dr. Robertson compared the .470 Nitro Express to the .450 Nitro Express. As you can see, both could be loaded with the same bullet weight at the same velocity, and consequently have the same energy. He also talked about a video where a hunter made a perfect frontal headshot on an elephant with a .470, but the elephant was totally unfazed, Such an example demonstrated that the 470 is quite lacking in sectional density and consequently is less effective compared to a 500 grain 450 nitro. As a side note, in that same interview, Dr. Robertson mentioned that Craig Boddington uses a double barrel 470 nitro, and if you watch his elephant hunting DVDs, Craig always needs to make 2 shots. The frontal shot regularly fails to kill, but he can reliably kill the elephant with the side shot as the elephant turns away. However, I believe you can't just look at sectional density. If a large caliber bullet and a small caliber bullet both have good sectional density, the smaller bullet will obviously require less energy to penetrate the same distance. This means that you can have a smaller diameter bullet that penetrates farther with less recoil. A practical example of this would be the fact that a 300 grain 375 H&H can penetrate deeper in pine boards than a 500 grain 458 Win Mag. This is a chart of different round nose bullets and their penetration in 3/4 inch pine boards. All of this information comes from the same source at the top. And I'm sorry if the letters are a bit small, it's a lot to try to fit into one page. Obviously, we can't say that X amount of penetration from pine boards equates to Y penetration in an elephant skull. As I mentioned before, we can easily and fairly compare the penetration of 375 H&H to 458 Win Mag. And when I say fairly compare, that's because I'm comparing the 375 rounds with the fast twist rate to the 458 rounds with the fast twist rate, and likewise when each caliber has a slow twist rate. When we exclude the rounds that exited out the side of the box, we consistently see across the board 375 penetrates deeper than 458 Win Mag. As far as I'm concerned, since the 375 has greater penetration and lower recoil, I don't see why you would choose a 458 Win Mag instead. I think one of the most interesting lessons from this wood penetration test is that you can increase penetration by simply using a barrel with a faster twist rate. This seems like a fairly obvious thing when you think about it. Standard twist rates are meant to stabilize bullets in the air, but when you want your bullet to be stabilized in a much more dense material, you need a faster twist rate. Also, we can see that the 416 by 375 improved and the 375 improved rounds had the same amount of penetration. Since both of these rifles had fast barrel twists, they are both directly comparable. If you want to keep reading this chart, pause the video now because I'm going to move on. Before I go any farther, I want to briefly mention that Dr. Kevin Robertson has stated that a standard 300 grain 375 H&H bullet is being spun too quickly by the standard 1 in 12 inch twist. He said that this makes the bullet fairly unstable / yaw and prone to tumbling / deflection, and has dangerously low penetration within 25 meters. He used the Greenhill formula to determine that the optimal twist rate for 1.4 inch long 300 grain bullets is 1 in 15 inches. Since the Greenhill formula assumes that the bullets you are using are perfect cylinders, we shouldn't automatically assume that it directly applies to bullets that aren't completely cylindrical, like the common round nose or flat nose bullets. Second of all, if Dr. Robertson's theory is true, 300 grain bullets shot from an even faster twist rate should mean significantly more deflection and less penetration in wood. The wood penetration chart I showed you before proved that this is not true. Third of all, logically, you should be able to see such yawing and a noticeable degradation of accuracy when you shoot paper targets within 25 meters with 300 grain bullets. Finally, a fellow YouTuber called Glutton for Punishment agreed to test whether 300 grain rounds actually deflect more easily within 25 yards. I'm extremely thankful he agreed to this. Unfortunately, I may have to post this video before I get his definitive results. Continuing with the pine board results, I mentioned before that on elephants the faster 458 Win Mag rounds are far better than the slower ones. Unfortunately, the pine boards don't show this difference. The round colored in purple should be penetrating noticeably less than the round colored in orange. Part of this is probably due to the fact that some bullet shapes penetrate better, but the obvious problem is that pine boards are not exactly like elephant skull. Comparing penetration of different bullets and calibers is difficult for obvious reasons. Most people don't have a bunch of elephant skulls of the same size lying around, Unless someone thinks of another method, pine board penetration or something similar is probably the best way to compare different rounds. However, you should always check the results against real-world use, and you should remember that when you have a round-nosed bullet from two different companies, you should expect that a slightly different bullet shape can penetrate more at the same velocity. The results in this chart are from a YouTube video where different rounds were shot into compressed wood boards that were not spaced apart. He did not mention the weights or the types of bullets that were used, but they all appeared to be the same type of round-nosed bullet. It seems to be very common for people to compare sectional density of different calibers as a way of trying to predict penetration. If you look at this chart, you'll notice that the 450-400 Nitro penetrated less than the 500 Nitro Express. If we only consider sectional density, the 500 Nitro should be penetrating less because it should have noticeably less sectional density. It appears that calibers like the 416 Rigby and the 500 Nitro Express are performing better because they have a higher momentum to caliber ratio. I mentioned before that the original lower velocity 500 grain 458 Winchester Magnum rounds penetrate noticeably worse than the average 300 grain 375 H&H. This included real-life use on elephants and in hard barriers like pine boards. This fact is indisputable proof that sectional density is not a reliable way of predicting penetration across calibers. Just to be clear, I'm still talking about non-expanding rounds. Also, I haven't found a good way to accurately and reliably predict penetration yet, so if you want answers, you may have to test the rounds yourself. As a side note, if we were looking at expanding rounds and talking about sectional density has even less relevance. Remember, the listed sectional density only applies to the bullet if it does not expand. If the bullet does expand, the number is essentially useless because the sectional density dramatically changes as the bullet expands. I've stressed how much penetration is needed for the frontal brain shot, but now I want to mention how comparatively little penetration is needed for the side and rear brain shots. The first and most surprising thing I have to show you is the fact that expanding bullets can occasionally penetrate into the brain of some elephants. A farmer using a homemade rifle shot this bullet into the side of an elephant's brain. The fact that it appears to be made out of just soft lead is quite surprising, because expanding bullets almost always failed on elephants with brain shots. Obviously, expanding bullets are an extremely poor choice for elephants, and the only reason I included this was to demonstrate that even a totally inadequate bullet may be able to penetrate into the brain. I should mention that there is a slim chance that this was actually a poorly constructed, steel-jacketed lead core bullet that totally came apart. I don't believe this to be the case based on the fact that the farmer used a homemade rifle. Since he didn't have access to factory-built rifles, it's fair to say that he probably didn't have access to factory-made ammunition, and was forced to make the bullet himself out of soft lead. Also, they did not seem to find any steel jacket fragments, just the lead bullet shown here. This picture is proof that a .41 Magnum can kill an elephant with a side brain shot. I mentioned before how I believe it's good to have a handgun to back up your rifle. The obvious problem with using a handgun to defend yourself against an elephant is that even with a deep penetrating handgun round, the round almost certainly won't reach the brain with a frontal shot. Even if you shoot the elephant in the heart, it will likely kill you before it dies. The only situation where someone could reasonably use a handgun to kill an elephant in defense is if the elephant is attacking one person and a second person runs behind or to the side of the elephant. If you are behind or facing the side of the elephant's head, the bone is thin enough at this angle that a well-placed handgun round could reach the brain. As always, you would want to have hard cast lead or a solid copper round for such a purpose. Even small rifle calibers with light bullets can penetrate the brain from the side. Dr. Kevin Robertson mentioned that he killed an elephant with a .222 Remington with a side brain shot. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the .222 Remington, it is the predecessor of the .223 Remington and is extremely similar. We also have a report of someone else using an M16 to kill elephants. People used to use a 10.75mm round that couldn't penetrate well because of poor bullet construction. It was fine for side brain shots, but for the frontal brain shot, it was reliably ineffective. even with frontal shots on 100 elephants. Not one of those bullets managed to go deep enough to reach the brain. Further real-world results demonstrate that with the same muzzle energy, a .416 Rigby has greater penetration than a .470 Nitro Express. Likewise, the .577 Nitro penetrates deeper than the .600 Nitro. Interestingly, the .577 reportedly has more killing power than the much more powerful .600 Nitro. Obviously, this is because penetration is what gives the round the ability to kill, not bullet diameter. Finally, we have an offhand mention that a .303 has twice the penetration, 6 feet, than a 10-bore rifle does. He doesn't specify whether this is 6 feet of penetration into the elephant's body or into the skull, though. We also have an account of John Taylor using a .600 Nitro for the frontal brain shot and finding that the bullet penetrated 27 inches. His conclusion was that a .577 does penetrate deeper, but if a .600 Nitro can kill an elephant from most angles, why would you want a bullet that has more penetration? The answer, of course, is that when you are really close to a large charging elephant, you need to penetrate much more bone because of the angle of the shot. The real question he should be asking is, why would you want a .600 Nitro if it recoils significantly more and penetrates significantly less?